Attention Commander players, my name's Commander Jinsdale and today we are getting cultured. Countercultured, that is, with a little help from Skullbriar, the walking grave. Now you can tell Skullbriar is a creature that means business just by reading its name. A combination of death and gardening, bones and blossoms, one angry pile of murderous mulch hellbent on tossing your opponents into the compost bin. He may start off as just a lowly 1/1, but every time he hits one of our opponents, he gets a +1/+1 counter, which is helped by the fact that he also inherently has haste. But what really makes him shine as a powerful force to be reckoned with is the fact that Skullbriar keeps all counters on it as it goes to any zone other than a player's hand or library. So, our cheap, aggressive commander gets to keep all the counters he's earned when he dies, or gets sent back to the command zone, which is why the focus of this deck is going to be to put as many different kinds of counters on him as possible in black and green, and build our own massive monster. Ikoria brought us a lot of the tools necessary to really make this deck something special in the realm of EDH, as it introduced keyword counters as a mechanic. So we've gained a way to give Skullbriar permanent buffs like Death Touch, Trample, or even Hexproof and Indestructible. The standouts here being cards like Hornbash Mentor, which puts a trample counter on target non-human creature you control when it enters the battlefield, and you can tap it to put a 1/1 counter on all your creatures with trample. His partner in crime, Duskfang Mentor, puts a lifelink counter on a non-human on enter the battlefield, and its ability lets you pump your lifelinkers instead. Conveniently, these both cost 3 to play out, so Skullbriar curves into them perfectly. We also have access to the duo of on-color cycling Godzillas, Titanoth Rex and Void Beckoner. 2 towering beaters with a shared ability, to let you cycle them and put a trample or death touch counter on a creature respectively. The ability to instant speed, draw a card, and put a keyword counter on our precious commander is powerful, and the fact that these colossal combat tricks are tutorable by Fierce Empath and just castable as huge bodies in a pinch makes them a no-brainer include. We also have access to Blood Curdle, murder with the upside of putting a menace counter on one of our guys. Spoiler alert, it's Skullbriar. It is always Skullbriar. That's the guy we're putting it on. Removing one of our opponent's threats and making our general more evasive in the process does sound like an appealing prospect, and if your opponents think they're smart, by going over the top of Skullbriar with Flyer, or maybe just while your Colossal Zombie plan is tapped out, you can catch them off guard with a timely sudden Spinnerets, which untaps target creature and gives it a reach counter and +1/+3 until end of turn. Not the most game-winning of counters we can put on our commander, but the utility can come in handy, since flyers are one of the few things our deck has trouble interacting with. To protect our beloved commander, we're playing the 2 sweet new counter cards that came out of the 2020 Commander Precons. Daring Fiendbonder, who is a 5/1 with haste that attacks each turn of Fable, and once he inevitably bites the dust, we can pay to put an indestructible counter on one of our creatures at sorcery speed, alongside Slippery Bogbonder, a 3/3 with flash, hexproof, and when it enters the battlefield, put a hexproof counter on a creature you control. Then you can move any number of counters from among other creatures you control onto said creature, which lets you move any counters you made the mistake of putting onto your other creatures onto Skullbriar, where they rightfully belong. These 2 fresh faces serve as indispensable protection for our already very sticky threat of a commander. And if you manage to get both an indestructible and hexproof counter on Skullbriar, I'm pretty sure you're legally allowed to remind your opponents that they can concede at any time, and that peace was never an option. Even though our commander's converted mana cost is pretty low and recasting it from the command zone a couple times doesn't break the mana bank, we pack a few efficient ways to bring him back from the graveyard just in case. Since our general only costs 2, we actually get to bring him back for just a single black with Unearth. Or, if the need arises, we can cast it on one of our other 3 CMC or less creatures. Or you can just cycle the card for 2. Super flexible. Phyrexian Delver also serves as a way to dig our Corpse King out of the bin on ETB, putting a body from our yard back into play at the cost of life equal to its CMC, which in the case of Skullbriar is a reasonable 2. Perhaps the most powerful of these recursion effects, though, is Call of the Death Dweller, which for only 3 mana brings up to 2 creatures with combined converted mana cost 3 or less back to play, and then you distribute a menace counter and a death touch counter among them. Even if you just use this to dig up Skullbriar, that's reanimation plus 2 keyword counters that'll stick with him to the end of the game. The last reanimation effect we run in the deck is Unbreakable Bond. It's a little costly at 5 total mana, but it brings Skullbriar, or any other creature from your yard for that matter, back to play with a lifelink counter on it. Now, keyword counters and recursion are great and all, but how are we going to make our little horror big enough to punch through the big threats of the EDH world? With cards like Corpsejack Menace, which doubles the amount of 1/1 counters we place on our commander, and Evolution Sage, which lets us proliferate whenever we play a land card, which in combination with Fertilid, a pet card of mine, lets us pay 2 mana to take a counter off the Fertilid, search our library for a basic land, and put it directly into play tapped, which then triggers the Evolution Sage, letting us proliferate and put a counter back onto Fertilid and whatever other permanents we want to proliferate. A nice little loop for getting back all the basics out of your deck and proliferating to your heart's content. Colonian Hydra doubles the amount of 1/1 counters on all of our creatures whenever it attacks, and considering it's a 0/0 that enters with 4 counters on it, and as trample, it alone gets out of hand quickly. Just in case our beatdown plan is going poorly, we run a couple sources of card advantage so that we can keep our garden properly nourished and healthy. Cards like Orin Frostfang, a current favorite of mine in green decks, which gives all your attacking creatures Death Touch and lets you draw a card whenever a creature you control hits a player. A snake with the static text of Thassa's Bident and both Nylea all rolled up into one cute little reptile. Tome of Legends enters with a counter on it, and gains 1 each time our commander enters play or attacks. And we can pay 1, tap the tome, and take a counter off it to draw a card. An extra card every turn as long as we're consistently attacking with our commander, which is the goal of the deck after all, or we can always use some of our various proliferation shenanigans for a more pacifist approach to counter gains. We also run cards like Life's Legacy and Momentous Fall to sacrifice one of our big bodies and draw a huge burst of cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power in a pinch. Rishkar's Expertise does the same, but for much more mana and without the need to sacrifice a creature as an additional cost. You also get a free 5-drop. Thanks, Rishkar. If you're feeling particularly evil, you can run cards like Solidarity of Heroes and Invigorating Surge, instant speed spells which double the amount of counters on one of our creatures, turning a non-lethal attack into a killing blow out of potentially nowhere, or maybe just turning an already lethal attack into gross overkill. Up to you. For a slower but recurring version of this effect, we run the aura equivalent in Hydra's Growth, which puts a 1/1 counter on the enchanted creature and doubles its counters on each of your upkeeps. Just be warned, if the magic cards ask you to feed them, it's time to decommission the deck, and try not to break your finger on the sharp cardboard corners. Anyways, folks, as always, I hope you enjoyed this week, this month, this deck tech. I'm going to get back to making them more often like I was before. Leave a comment down below about something you enjoyed in the video, or maybe something you think I could have done better, and maybe something you want to see from me in the future. Subscribe if you want to see more content like this from your friendly neighborhood commander, and until next time, folks, at ease.